There is a force within the human mind more powerful than logic, more persistent than desire, and more dangerous than fear. It is obsession. Unlike ordinary interest, obsession does not politely visit the mind and then leave. It settles in quietly, grows through repetition, and eventually begins directing thoughts, emotions, and decisions without permission. The person rarely notices its arrival because obsession often disguises itself as passion, love, ambition, or determination. Only later, when the mind can think of nothing else, does its true nature become visible. Obsession rarely begins as something dangerous. It often starts as a simple interest, a strong desire, or an emotional attachment that seems completely harmless. At first, the mind returns to the same thought because it finds it exciting, meaningful, or rewarding. On time, however, this repeated focus gradually grows stronger until it begins to dominate attention. The difference between healthy passion and obsession lies in emotional control. A passionate person directs their attention toward a goal while remaining capable of stepping back, resting, and considering other priorities. An obsessed person loses this flexibility. Their thoughts become increasingly automatic, returning to the same subject, regardless of whether it serves their well-being. Human psychology is naturally drawn toward repetition because the brain strengthens whatever it repeatedly focuses on. Each cycle of thinking reinforces the next, making the object of obsession feel even more important than it truly is. As emotional investment increases, objective judgment begins to fade. Small events are interpreted as highly significant, ordinary setbacks feel unbearable, and temporary obstacles become personal battles. The mind no longer evaluates reality calmly because emotion has taken control of perception. This process can affect relationships, careers, ambitions, or even personal goals. Someone may become so consumed by another person's approval that every conversation determines their mood, or become so attached to success that every failure feels like the end of their identity. In each case, the underlying problem is not desire itself, but the loss of emotional balance. Self-control weakens as emotional intensity grows stronger. The individual begins reacting instead of choosing, driven by impulses rather than thoughtful decisions. Recognizing this pattern requires honest self-awareness. It means asking whether your thoughts are serving your purpose or quietly controlling your life. Emotional discipline allows you to experience ambition, love, curiosity, and determination without becoming imprisoned by them. It creates the ability to pause before reacting, to question automatic thoughts, and to redirect attention toward what genuinely deserves your energy. When emotional control remains stronger than emotional impulse, desire becomes a powerful source of motivation rather than a force that quietly takes command of your mind, allowing you to pursue meaningful goals with clarity, balance, and lasting inner stability. The human mind has a remarkable tendency to become fascinated by what remains just beyond its reach. What cannot be fully understood, possessed, or controlled often occupies far more mental space than what is already familiar and secure. This is not because the unattainable is always more valuable, but because uncertainty stimulates the imagination. When something is incomplete, the mind instinctively attempts to fill in the missing pieces. It creates possibilities, imagines outcomes, and searches endlessly for answers that may never come. This process gradually transforms ordinary curiosity into persistent mental fixation. A person who receives inconsistent attention may think constantly about someone who rarely responds, while overlooking those who offer genuine care and consistency. An entrepreneur may become consumed by a single missed opportunity instead of recognizing the many possibilities that still remain. The object itself often becomes less important than the unanswered questions surrounding it. Human psychology dislikes unfinished stories because the brain naturally seeks closure. Every unanswered message, uncertain outcome, or unresolved conflict becomes an open loop that repeatedly pulls attention back toward itself. The longer uncertainty continues, the stronger this mental pull can become. Imagination then begins replacing observation. Instead of responding to reality, people often respond to the stories they have created in their own minds. They interpret ordinary events as meaningful signs, assign deep significance to random coincidences, and convince themselves that persistence alone will eventually provide the certainty they seek. This cycle grows stronger because every moment of emotional investment makes it more difficult to let go. The mind begins confusing attachment with importance, believing that the amount of energy invested proves the value of the object being pursued. Yet effort does not always reflect worth. Sometimes the greatest obstacle is not the situation itself, but the inability to accept uncertainty. Emotional maturity requires recognizing that not every question will receive an answer and not every desire deserves endless attention. By accepting that some things cannot be fully possessed or understood, the mind gradually regains its freedom. Attention returns to the present instead of remaining trapped in endless speculation. This shift allows decisions to be guided by reality rather than imagination, replacing obsessive thinking with clarity, patience, and emotional balance, while freeing mental energy for pursuits that genuinely contribute to growth and lasting fulfillment. Scarcity and uncertainty have a unique influence on the human mind because they naturally intensify desire. People often assume they value something because it is inherently important, yet psychology shows that things become even more attractive when they appear limited, unpredictable, or difficult to obtain. What is always available is often taken for granted, while what remains just out of reach begins to occupy an increasing amount of mental space. This response is deeply connected to the way the brain processes incomplete information. When outcomes remain uncertain, the mind continues searching for answers, replaying possibilities, and imagining different scenarios in an attempt to create certainty. Instead of accepting the unknown, it becomes trapped in an endless cycle of speculation. A relationship with inconsistent affection may feel more emotionally intense than one built on steady trust because uncertainty keeps attention constantly engaged. A missed opportunity may seem more valuable than many opportunities that are still available simply because it can no longer be easily recovered. Scarcity creates the impression that something is exceptionally valuable, while uncertainty convinces the mind that one more effort might finally produce the desired result. Together, these forces strengthen emotional attachment and gradually transform interest into obsession. The individual begins measuring every small event for hidden meaning, interpreting ordinary interactions as significant signs, and allowing hope to outweigh evidence. Decisions become guided less by reality and more by imagined possibilities. This process often causes people to overlook obvious warning signs because the emotional investment has become too strong to evaluate the situation objectively. Understanding this psychological pattern creates an important advantage. Instead of assuming that intense desire automatically proves importance, you learn to question whether scarcity and uncertainty are amplifying your emotions beyond what the situation truly deserves. This awareness encourages patience, allowing you to separate genuine value from temporary emotional excitement. It also reminds you that consistency often provides a more reliable foundation than unpredictability. Relationships, opportunities, and goals that support long-term growth are usually strengthened through steady progress rather than constant uncertainty. By recognizing how scarcity and unpredictability influence attention, you regain the ability to make thoughtful decisions based on evidence instead of emotional intensity. In doing so, you protect your mind from becoming controlled by the illusion that what is hardest to obtain is always what is most valuable, replacing compulsive pursuit with clear judgment, emotional discipline, and a more balanced understanding of what truly deserves your attention. When obsession is left unchecked, it slowly changes the way the mind interprets reality. What begins as a strong desire or deep interest gradually grows into an emotional force that influences every thought and decision. The greatest danger is that this transformation happens quietly. A person rarely notices the moment when healthy determination becomes unhealthy fixation because each new thought feels reasonable when viewed in isolation. Over time, however, emotion begins replacing logic as the primary guide for judgment. Instead of evaluating situations objectively, the mind starts searching only for information that supports its existing beliefs. Contradictory evidence is ignored, while even the smallest event that appears to confirm the obsession is magnified. This psychological pattern narrows perception until the individual sees only what they want to see rather than what actually exists. Everyday experiences become emotionally charged. Ordinary coincidences seem deeply meaningful, and temporary setbacks are interpreted as personal attacks or signs that success is just one more effort away. Relationships often suffer because attention becomes focused on a single person or outcome, while everything else loses importance. Responsibilities are neglected, emotional balance weakens, and the ability to make thoughtful decisions gradually disappears. Human nature is especially vulnerable to this process because emotions create a sense of urgency. They convince the mind that immediate action is necessary even when patience would produce better results. As emotional intensity increases, impulsive decisions become more common. People may ignore trusted advice, sacrifice long-term goals, or continue investing time and energy into situations that repeatedly produce disappointment. The obsession itself becomes more important than the original purpose that created it. This is why self-awareness is essential. By regularly questioning your thoughts, examining your motivations, and comparing your emotions with objective evidence, you interrupt the cycle before it gains complete control. Rational thinking returns when you allow facts to challenge feelings instead of allowing feelings to redefine facts. Emotional discipline does not eliminate desire or ambition. It keeps them aligned with reality. It reminds you that genuine progress depends on balanced judgment rather than overwhelming emotion. By recognizing the early signs of fixation and consciously restoring perspective, you prevent obsession from replacing wisdom, allowing your decisions to remain guided by clarity, patience, and reason instead of becoming controlled by emotional impulses that distort both perception and reality. Self-awareness is the turning point where obsession loses its power and purposeful discipline begins to take its place. Every person experiences strong desires, ambitions, and emotional attachments, but very few pause to examine why those thoughts have become so dominant. The mind naturally follows whatever repeatedly captures its attention, strengthening those mental pathways until they begin operating automatically. Without self-awareness, this process continues unnoticed. A person may believe they are simply dedicated to a goal, deeply in love, or determined to succeed, while in reality they have become emotionally dependent on a single outcome. Their happiness, confidence, and peace of mind gradually become tied to something outside their control. Self-awareness interrupts this cycle by encouraging honest observation instead of automatic reaction. It asks difficult questions that many people avoid. Why am I thinking about this so constantly? What emotion is driving this desire? Am I acting from genuine purpose or from fear, insecurity, loneliness, or the need for validation? These questions do not weaken ambition, they refine it. They separate meaningful goals from emotional impulses that merely create temporary excitement. Human psychology often confuses intensity with importance, but disciplined individuals understand that not everything demanding attention deserves it. Through regular reflection, they learn to recognize when thoughts are becoming repetitive without being productive. Instead of allowing emotions to dictate every decision, they step back, examine the evidence, and consciously redirect their focus toward actions that create long-term progress. This shift transforms obsession into disciplined purpose. The energy that once fueled endless worry, unhealthy attachment, or compulsive thinking is redirected toward learning, practice, creativity, and steady improvement. The goal remains important, but it no longer controls the individual's emotional state. Success becomes something to pursue rather than something required for self-worth. This mindset creates resilience because setbacks are viewed as opportunities to adjust instead of reasons to collapse emotionally. Self-awareness also strengthens emotional independence, allowing confidence to grow from consistent effort rather than uncertain outcomes. As this habit develops, the mind becomes calmer, clearer, and more intentional. Thoughts are no longer driven by uncontrolled impulses but guided by conscious choices. In this way, self-awareness does not eliminate passion. It gives passion direction, balance, and purpose, ensuring that your strongest desires become a source of growth instead of a force that quietly takes control of your life. Attention is the most valuable resource you possess because it determines the direction of your thoughts, your emotions, and ultimately your life. Every achievement, habit, relationship, and belief grows stronger through repeated attention. Whatever consistently occupies your mind gradually shapes the way you perceive the world and influences the decisions you make. Most people assume they control their attention, but in reality, they often allow it to be captured by distractions, emotional impulses, and external influences without realizing it. Human psychology is naturally attracted to novelty, uncertainty, conflict, and emotional stimulation. This is why it is so easy to become consumed by endless notifications, social comparison, unresolved problems, or unhealthy fixations. Each moment of uncontrolled attention strengthens those mental patterns, making them even more difficult to escape. Over time, your focus begins controlling you instead of serving you. You react instead of choosing, constantly pulled toward whatever creates the strongest emotional response. This quiet loss of control affects every area of life. Important goals are delayed because attention is scattered. Relationships suffer because the mind is never fully present. Creativity declines because uninterrupted focus becomes increasingly rare. Mastering your attention begins with recognizing that every thought does not deserve your engagement. You have the ability to choose where your mental energy is invested. This requires discipline because the mind will naturally drift toward what is easiest, loudest, or most emotionally stimulating. Purposeful attention, however, is directed rather than automatic. It remains focused on meaningful work, personal growth, healthy relationships, and values that contribute to long-term fulfillment. The more intentionally you guide your attention, the stronger your ability to resist distraction becomes. Emotional reactions lose some of their influence because your focus is no longer controlled by every passing feeling or external event. Instead of allowing the world to constantly decide what deserves your attention, you make that decision consciously. This creates remarkable psychological freedom. Your peace no longer depends on every opinion you hear or every challenge you encounter. Your mind becomes calmer because it is no longer pulled in countless directions at once. By mastering your attention, you master the foundation of every other habit, decision, and achievement. Your thoughts become clearer, your actions become more consistent, and your purpose becomes stronger because your greatest resource is finally working for you instead of against you. In the end, the quality of your life is shaped not simply by what happens to you, but by what you repeatedly choose to give your attention to each day.